Hi, everyone. We have Andrew here, and Ian is back as well. Welcome back, Ian. You'll hear about them in a second, but I just want to explain what we're here to do. This is a showcase, so you may have seen the intro video on the channel about this, but it's a new series we're doing where we look through cool TypeScript projects, maybe unknown ones, but maybe also known ones that are brand new, and see what they do and how they work, and hopefully provide some value to you all about how that actually can apply to your day-to-day. And if not, at least it'll be fun to go way off into the weeds on some like crazy esoteric thing. Today, this is very practical, though. So we have Andrew. Andrew, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name's Andrew Branch. I work at Microsoft on the TypeScript team. Been there for just about 4 years now, which is crazy. Doesn't feel like that. But yeah, I've worked a ton on auto imports. That was kind of one of my main focuses, just coincidentally happened to kind of work out that way until more recently in the last year or so. I've just been working on basically all things modules, which is kind of how I landed here on this little AreTheTypesWrong side project.
Cool. I want to get into that in a minute, but I want to say thank you for all of the work you've done sort of explaining modules, explaining module resolution. I gave a talk at Michigan TypeScript a few months ago, and your repos and your comments were invaluable for me, just like learning how it all works and trying to explain it to other people. So yeah, thanks for all the outreach you've done about module resolution.
Yeah, I watched your talk. And I think you were like the first person outside of myself or my teammates I've like heard even say the words module resolution. So yeah, this has been definitely like a learning journey for me, and it's cool to have a few more people on board too.
So at the risk of interjecting too much, I want to say, Andrew, you're being incredibly humble. For those watching that don't know Andrew, the work he's doing is extremely important and very thankless. It's the kind of thing that's just under the covers enough that you might not know what's like the hard work that's going on, but it is like extremely laborious to do this stuff. And there's so many edge cases. And that's kind of what Ian's hour-long, horrifically long dive into module resolution was about, was like, there's so much minutia and like the multi-layer complexity. I don't know. It's a real, we're real glad to have you in this world, Andrew.
And I think things have gotten a lot better even since I gave that talk. Now that there's the bundler resolution strategy that like solves a lot of the like problems and confusing parts that I sort of dove into in the talk. So and I think that was a lot also thanks to you. So appreciate that.
Thanks, that's really kind. Yeah, it's one of those things where there's a lot of complexity there, and I think the ideal case is that like there's not, but unfortunately that's like not the world that we live in. And so like the next best thing is like all the complexity can just like be hidden under the hood. And that's kind of like the long-term goal. But in the meantime, I think we still are kind of in this world where like average people who really just want to spend their time like writing code have to kind of understand some of these things under the hood. So a lot of people are frustrated by that, and I totally get it and share the frustration. So everything that I've been working on is kind of a bit of a compromise. Like, can we make things simple, but also can we give you the tools that you need to understand this stuff?
Speaking of tools to help people understand things, can you talk to us about AreTheTypesWrong?
Yeah. So, like I said, I've been working on module-related stuff for work, and I'm in the middle of like some big documentation overhaul on modules, and writing is hard, and I'm a really slow writer. I hope that the output is good, but it's taking me forever. And I noticed that the rate of getting issues about this stuff that would have been really nice to be able to link to some talks that say like, oh, here's like what you're experiencing, you can read about it. I just kept over and over again wishing I had like had the docs done so I could link to people, but it was all a work in progress. And so I'd be just writing these like 3-paragraph essays on GitHub. That's like totally not discoverable. Just repeating that work over and over again in the meantime, that eventually kind of reached a breaking point where I was like, I need to just get something up that people can experiment with and like see some of this process for themselves in the meantime, like before there's maybe more polished tools and documentation to show. And I feel like I can get something up, in a weekend or something. So that's where this came from. It's really motivated by just a stream of issues and questions on Twitter and things like that. So I have one example here ready to go. The kind of issue that I'm talking about that people would post on the TypeScript issue tracker is like, hey, I have this file and it's working fine, but when I try to move to a different module mode, like I hear that everyone's telling me I should be using Node Next. I come back over here and I'm using this library, and all of a sudden, like it doesn't work anymore, and it thinks that I need to say like expect.default, and that looks wrong to me. So the new module mode is broken, right? And 9 times out of 10, TypeScript isn't broken here. Either the library's types are wrong, or you're using settings that just aren't right for your use case. And so that is the class of problems that is actually like, I noticed when answering these questions, it's pretty like mechanical to explain, to diagnose and explain like exactly what's going wrong here. And so I built this tool in like, I think I got it up in a night, which is why the UI is extremely bare. I actually used to be a front-end web developer, and I've not published so many projects because I got bogged down in details that didn't ultimately matter. And the whole point of this was to be like a fast interim thing. And so I was like, I'm going to use like zero framework and as few lines of CSS as I possibly can, and get this up as fast as I can. So I might make a nicer UI eventually, but
it's very brutalist. It's kind of a Craigslist-y kind of. It's so in the aesthetic. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, a bit of a tangent, but the design and the name is actually inspired by one of my favorite websites of all time. IsItChristmas.com. You'll have to visit it on Christmas. I don't even remember what the yes page is, but the initial design for AreTheTypesWrong, I'm just going to say like yes all the time. I didn't think that would be as useful.
So just out of curiosity, in case people watching are interested, are you interested in like if somebody wanted to make a React app, like kind of beautiful front or whatever, some kind of front end for this, is that something you're interested in getting as a submission?
Yeah, actually on the GitHub README, I say something to that effect. I like the fact that it's simple, but I would like to have a bit more of a design here eventually. My plan right now, nobody has so far expressed interest in doing this, and that's totally fine. But I am open to it. My plan right now is I want to be like really happy with the analysis and then maybe start down that path. Now, like it's the reason I was hesitant to make a CLI out of it too. Might be getting ahead of myself. But I think the analysis is still evolving and it may require some API changes. So I don't want to like add a ton of complexity to the front end before that stuff is settled.
Good call.
So taking just a real brief step back, this is it's a tool that will help you understand your type problems in your applications or your packages, right? Is that sort of the basics for what this is?
Yeah, that's right. And I might have just gotten distracted from my own example. But so the idea is that a user encountering a problem like this, when they move to an ESM Node Next file, can just plug in this library name and just see some information. And the raised eyebrow face describes exactly what they're seeing here. That what we're doing is resolving to a common JS module, and it has an ES module marker and a module.exports.default. And Node isn't going to do anything with that. And so you're going to need a .default on there, which is exactly the symptom that we see. So slightly belying the name, this is actually a case where the types are not wrong, but the implementation is not usable in Node the way that you might expect. So we can actually see that like what the types think about this is correct if we run node. Expect is not a function, and expect.default is. So the types are actually telling you exactly the right thing here. And if I can like preach on filing TypeScript issues really quick, like this is exactly the kind of thing that you like need to back up a claim that module resolution is broken with. Like if you say like something is for node, then like the thing that matters is the behavior in node. And in this case, like we see the API does look weird here. Like it's probably not what the library authors intended for you to have to say like .default on this. But it is actually what's required in node.
And I think people have maybe gotten a little bit spoiled from some bundlers that maybe abstract some of this away, or they sort of like do some magic to take care of things so that like you don't have to think about this, right? But Node is much more, you have to know what you're doing in Node, right?
And that's why you don't get an error in other modes, because the resolution settings and the module detection, everything kind of comes together to assume that your scenario is going to be more like one of those that you'd be like running in a bundler where this would work.
So is this expected, you expect people to sort of use this as consumers of packages, or, you know, in this use case you've given here, you're trying to use expect, something's not behaving quite right. You can come to AreTheTypesWrong because you think maybe there's an issue with them, and then it'll like explain to you what's going on, how maybe you should be using it. I could also see this being really useful for publishers, right? People who are making libraries and you know aren't maybe super familiar with all the different modes of TypeScript and ESM and CJS, and everything gets a little bit complex. Is this also something that you could use to sort of like double check yourself?
Yeah, so my motivation was 100% on like the consumer side. And it occurred to me only once this was like pretty well underway that I can easily like have a npm pack file upload here, and you upload the TGZ and everything works exactly the same. That functionality came almost for free because when you plug this in, it's downloading the TGZ from the npm API. So everything after that kind of works the same, which of course like opens the door to like, I have a package that I'm about to publish, maybe I should check it first. So it was kind of an afterthought. But once this was here, people pretty quickly opened an issue on the site and said, like, can I have a CLI? Like, can there be, exit codes? And I want to check, as a continuous integration step that I'm not about to publish something that's busted, which totally makes sense. The one hesitation I have with that right now is at the same time, I got issues. Initially, like you can see this package JSON entry point has green check marks that say JSON. This was actually a response to another issue. Initially, JSON entry points like this would show up as like no types, like these other entry points here. By the way, like I think these red X's are probably expected and not a problem, because these are likely internal, not intended to be exposed to users. And that, along with the JSON thing, is exactly why I have a slight hesitation about making a CLI out of this, at least as the API is today, because it's really not intended to be a linter kind of thing where your goal is like 100% green check marks. And I find linters to be like pretty opinionated a lot of the time. And there are some problems that show up here that are pretty unambiguously like, yeah, something's wrong. But ultimately, the tool is just designed to give you info about what's happening. And like I said, with these no types entry points, like that is probably like perfectly expected by the authors of expect. And it doesn't indicate that like something is wrong and you should fix it necessarily. Like it's supposed to give you info that if someone were trying to write this import, it would be untyped. So if that's expected for you, then like that's great. So I think that there probably needs to be like a severity system, disambiguate like useful info from warnings from like, no, something's really wrong. And additionally, maybe set the ability to like ignore certain entry points or certain kinds of problems.
Could you tell me what that expect/build actually is? It's a subpath that's shipped with the npm, and is it like in the package JSON as an export?
Yeah, that's how it finds these. We
Okay.
get one column per export map entry. So if I look at their package JSON, they have an export map for dot and then one for each of these. So that's kind of another limitation, is that if you don't have an export map, we're only going to try the default entry point, the like top level expect, because we're not sure what other files in there like are meaningful to test. But if you say that you have subpaths, then like that's a much stronger cue that you intend for someone to import this.
Right. And would it be possible for somebody to like give a configuration to, we're already talking about config files. What have we done? Would it be possible to give a configuration to say, hey, I just care about this export because this is the one I ship to my users and the rest of them are internal only or whatever?
Yeah, I think something like that would be necessary if this is going to be, a CLI that you need a zero exit code in order to continue on.
Yep.
You've already got scope creep in this thing that took you a night to build. I guess that's kind of the way of how it goes.
Yeah, actually someone else volunteered. I know Mark Erickson of Redux has kind of hacked the API together. He was the first one to ask for the core module of this to be published to NPM. And I went ahead and did that. It's unstable API, but you can use it if you want. It's at AreTheTypesWrong/core. And he made a little CI step using that for, I don't remember if it was Redux itself, but one of the packages he maintains is currently using this to validate. So you can do it. It's still a little raw, and the API might change. But there are a couple people on that issue who are volunteering or interested in turning this into a more proper CLI.
That's great. Speaking of config, does this depend on like which TypeScript version, or is there a way to sort of change any of that, or like TypeScript options? Will that impact whether or not the types are considered correct?
It bundles a TypeScript version that's reported down here. I think that it's really designed to show you like the ideal state of config. So if there are like past TypeScript bugs that would prevent some import from working, you're not going to be able to test that. Part of it is like Bundler is brand new in 5.0, and I feel like it's valuable to show it in all cases, and it's like not possible to show if you use an older TypeScript version. So we're pretty much limited to 5.0 and beyond. I think I'm using a nightly here because one of the problems that I detect, I had to like make a slight modification in TypeScript itself to be able to like parse the traces. Somewhere in here, like you can find the trace resolution. This is another great tip, by the way, that I think was in your talk. TSC -- trace resolution will show you what's happening when it processes your imports. And that comes in here, but I had to make a change to the trace output in order to parse a particular kind of problem. So it's pretty dependent on TypeScript version, so I don't think that'll be something that can be editable.
Makes sense, especially as like a tool to check whether or not, like you gave the use case at the beginning of, oh, I think TypeScript has a problem. And like, well, you may as well like check it against the latest TypeScript
Right.
to make sure that like that's working. So I see where that makes sense.
Do you think this is something that you'll be using, like pointing people towards, like just how today, if you have a TypeScript issue, it's you're kind of pushed towards the route of providing a playground link that replicates the issue. If somebody has a module problem, do you think there's a time in the future when we might say, hey, can you demonstrate this using AreTheTypesWrong in some way? Or maybe integrating it into the playground somehow as well, I guess the playground doesn't have files. So
I actually thought about, this is like totally over the top, but on the TypeScript issue tracker, we run a lot of automations through at mentioning TypeScript bot, which like goes and parses your command and runs different builds or whatever. I thought about integrating it with TypeScript bot. So whenever someone says like module resolution doesn't work for such and such library, I can just be like, TypeScript bot, are the expect types wrong? And it would just come back and say like, yes, here's the link.
That doesn't sound over the top to me. That sounds awesome.
I'm picking on expect because I have no idea who maintains this library. And in fact, the types are not wrong. They're just, it's a different kind of unexpected problem that that might confuse a user. So,
can you talk a little bit about like the process of building this? Like, how does it work under the hood? You said you did it in like a night. That seems really impressive to me. Like, how are you actually accomplishing this?
Sure. And to be clear, more work has gone into it since that first night. But it is fairly simple under the hood. And as a slight tangent, doing this kind of side project, I don't do very often, but it is super useful for me as a TypeScript maintainer to go and use TypeScript in a different context, especially where I get to use some like newer web technologies and things like that. So I have a monorepo set up here with two packages. I have the web front end, which is served by Vite. Really like Vite for what it's worth. It's pretty awesome.
Ian works on Vite-test, so you're
no, I work on Storybook Vite.
Okay, Storybook Vite. Sorry. Well, okay. See, I'm a simpleton, so to me those are the same thing. But anyway,
Vite-test is awesome too, though.
Yeah. I've heard good things. Yeah. And then there's the core module, which is the API, and it is designed to run both in Node and in web workers. So I try to keep it fairly agnostic. So everything is kind of all the logic is here in the core module. I'll expand this a little bit, but it mostly just uses the TypeScript API. So it unpacks the tarball and then generates. It goes over the package JSON, and this is kind of the core of the analysis. It's check entry point typed. Essentially what it's doing, I don't know how useful it is to like try to really read the code here. It's not super long. If people are interested in like going and read the source code on GitHub, I think it should be a little messy, but like fairly understandable. Essentially what it's doing under the hood is like pretending that there is an import of something like this expect from different kinds of files. So like in Node 16, we have a strong distinction between like what's a common JS file and what's an ES module file. So different module resolution settings and different kinds of imaginary files that we're resolving from. And most of this info comes from the resolve module, ts.resolve module name. Like this is what happens under the hood in TypeScript itself whenever it processes an import statement. It will run resolve module name on that module specifier, whatever you said. And this is how it finds the types for whatever it is that you're importing. So we do that to find the types. And then a lot of these rules depend on also knowing how the JavaScript would resolve independently of the types. So if this problem, for example, depends on analyzing something that's actually in the JavaScript, not in the types itself. So that's just a different mode called no DTS resolution. This is actually an internal compiler option that I made a few TypeScript versions ago to support go to source definition, which is, I don't know if I have like a great example here. I'm afraid if I try something at random, it's not going to work because that's how demos go. But there was this feature that was highly requested, like go to definition often takes you to BTS files. A bunch of people, especially JavaScript only users, are like, I never want to see that ever. And so we made this other mode where you can go to source definition. Hey, it worked. And it takes you to like JavaScript files only. So it's like do resolution, but pretend DTS files don't exist, which coincidentally is like super useful for this tool.
Yeah, that's
Oh,
amazing.
wow. Yeah, that's a cool connection. I use that functionality all the time, and I was really excited when it came along, although I do care quite a lot about TypeScript files definitions.
Yeah, it's nice to have the option to sort of see either one. You talked a little bit about ESM and CJS. That's come up a few times here. And I admit I sent one of the packages that I helped to maintain through this tool, and it was complaining to me about, I don't know if it was exactly this, but it was something related where like you'd have to use an asynchronous, dynamic import in order to get it. And like, and I think I've also seen in the past where if you are dual bundling for ESM and CJS, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think technically you should have two different type definition files, one that's ESM and one that's CJS. First of all, is that correct?
Yes, you're spot on both of those things.
Okay. So I think that it confuses me, and it may confuse others as well. Is there a recommended way to generate those? It seems like a lot of bundlers or tools that are out there right now don't really support that. And maybe that's one value to this tool you've built here, is sort of like exposing this as an issue, because I think most of the time it kind of works out okay, so people don't like realize there's a problem. But maybe once people start running tools through AreTheTypesWrong, they'll start realizing that like, hey, maybe bundlers need to do something different, or maybe like tooling needs to change around this. Is that kind of the way you see this as well, or is there just something I'm missing, and like there's actually an easy way to do all this?
There is no easy way to do all this. I think you're exactly right. This is where I can potentially get in trouble, because like diagnosing this is like relatively easy, and suggesting a fix is quite hard. And yeah, I like don't want to throw shade at all of these amazing tools, but there are a lot of tools that claim to be able to take. Everyone wants to write ESM input, right? So take ESM input and then give you a bundle or output individual files that are like ESM or CJS or both, and then you can ship your package that way. This is like a more recent realization that I've had, and I'm still trying to figure out like how exactly to come to terms with this, given there are so many tools that do this today. I do not think that any of them are safe. I think that you fundamentally need a type checker to do that and determine that it's safe. So the actual transformation is like syntactic. And so, of course, like you don't need a type checker to do a transformation from ESM to CJS. The problem is, if we look at, I just had an export map up here. So this one doesn't use separate import and require conditions, but many packages do. So this uses conditions here for types and default. Import and require are also common conditions that you can see in these, which allows packages to resolve different files based on whether the importer is an ESM module using import or a common JS module using require, even though in TypeScript files it can say import in your input. Once you get an output from that, it's going to say require. So packages are able in Node. Yeah, we should clarify that like I'm mostly talking about Node here, although some bundlers replicate some of this behavior as well.
My palms are getting a little sweaty because I do the thing that you just said. I produce, if I have the dual package thing I need to produce, I produce the common JS, and I produce the ESM, and then usually I produce the types with the ESM or something. But I produce the types once, not twice. Why is that? What am I doing wrong? Explain that to me.
Right. So the thing that's wrong with that approach is that TypeScript, let's see, every DTS file represents exactly one JS file. And I'm using DTS and JS loosely because there are like multiple different kinds of like JS extensions, right? There's JS, MJS, and CJS.
Sure.
And then on the TypeScript side, there's an exactly parallel split. There's TS, MTS, and CTS, and those compile to the corresponding outputs. And DTS files actually have that same exact split, where you can have .d.mts, CTS, TS. And so when a TypeScript compiler sees a DTS file or a MTS, whatever, it's making an assumption about how that file must have been generated. Because if you were to generate this with a TSC run itself, then like the extension had to match, right? If it saw an MTS file, it's going to make a .d.mts. And so it's making an assumption about what kind of module the JS file is and where it's going to be located. So this is a good example of like something that is going to work properly because these two files are co-located and they have like a parallel extension. The problem is if you make a single .dts file and then type that as like ESM with a package JSON type module field, and then run another build to do the CJS build, and you only have the one .dts to represent both of those, well, you're asking one file to represent two distinct module kinds at the same time, ESM and CJS. And that was never a situation that you could have got by running TSC like forwards. And so TSC is never going to understand the scenario that you've set up when you're asking it to resolve that in reverse, right? When it sees a DTS file, it's going to assume it came from one thing, and it's going to assume the module kind represented by that is exactly what it can find out by the file extension and the package JSON type module. So when you write like types import require kind of condition, everything is hiding behind the types, and there's no longer any kind of like split between the import and require as far as TypeScript can see.
So if there's a mismatch somehow between the common JS and the ESM generated types, then like TypeScript would never be the wiser, and it'll tell you everything's good when really things are not good.
Yeah, and it's also not just about the content of those files, because in Node especially, imports of ESM and CJS files just work differently. Like we saw in my initial example here, like in this case, there's actually only one. There was only one file, and it's typed correctly. Like we have a CJS module here, but it literally works differently when you like require this versus when you import it. And so there are scenarios where TypeScript just has to know what module kind something is, even if the type level contents of that file is identical between the CJS version and the ESM version. It has to know what kind of module the JS is actually going to be in order to ensure that you don't accidentally do something like try to write a require for an ESM file, which can't be done in Node. You have to dynamic import that instead. Or in ways that like default imports vary between like transpiled CJS versus true ESM.
Wow.
So it sounds like there's maybe a call to action or a challenge here for bundler writers or tooling developers to take this into account, and maybe they need to think about generating two different types files, or like as a if I were writing a package right now and I wanted to dual bundle it, can I use TypeScript directly? I guess I could, right? I could run it twice, once in each mode, and generate all the files, but then I wouldn't get some of the things that bundlers give me, like being able to sort of like bunch everything into a single file. So it's kind of like you have a trade-off. You can do it sort of like one way or the other right now until maybe bundlers start to take this into account, it sounds like.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I don't want to imply that like bundlers and other build tools, like that the burden is like fully on them. This is not easy to do even with TypeScript. I think you're right about basically running TSC twice is, I think, the only like type safe way to ensure that you can get correct outputs that are actually going to work at runtime for both ESM and CJS. And sometimes it may not be possible. If you have a top level ESM only dependency, like you can't write a common JS thing for that. And like that's just how it is. And any syntactic transform that doesn't recognize that is going to produce something that's just instantly going to crash at runtime in Node. And so TypeScript can't like save you from that exactly. Like it doesn't have a solution. There is no solution for that. But it can at least give you an error at build time and say like, it's not going to work when it correctly knows what kind of module you're producing. So there are definitely things that TypeScript, I think, can do, things that I'm thinking about for the future to make this task easier. But I also think that other build tools that make it very easy to land in one of these situations where you have a ESM bundle and a CJS bundle and one set of types, and the CJS bundle may or may not even like work correctly in Node at runtime. It's like not fully checked. I think we do need to be careful to like make it a little harder to land yourself in a bad situation there. That said, like none of this is easy. It's not easy to do, like you said, with TypeScript alone. And it really makes me question like the value of dual bundling itself. Right before this, I like asked on Twitter, like why are people doing it? Like real question. Why, like what do we gain from dual mode packages? Like I'm somebody who wants to see the ecosystem move to ESM, but obviously like that's pretty infectious. And if you're a big library with a lot of users, you're going to have to like, keep shipping CJS for a while. And I understand that, but like what exactly is to be gained by like shipping both at the same time? I got a few interesting replies, but there's it's not totally clear to me like what the answers are.
I mean, yeah, I think for me, go ahead, Ian. Yeah.
No, you go. I was just gonna say, it seems like maybe a topic for another conversation. Just sort of the move to ESM and CJS and sort of the confusion that's caused. I know we've sort of we're here talking about AreTheTypesWrong. We've kind of derailed into this other topic.
It's so interesting though. Yeah, but okay. Good. Thank you, Ian. The viewers, thank you, keeping us on track. Are there any other things that you would like to see? Like we talked about a few things you'd like to add to this going forward. Are there any, I mean, the CLI and, different ways of looking at maybe filtering the outputs that are, or the exports rather, for things that we care about or don't care about, maybe having a different front end. Is there any other thing like that this has sparked in you that you would like to see this do in the future?
Thinking about the longer term future of this is a little tricky because I think anyone who is like reasonably engaged with this might ask like, okay, if this can detect like so many TypeScript problems, like why can't just TypeScript detect these problems? And like when you run TSC, it just like tells you what's wrong, or it like works around it or whatever. Like if we can do this analysis and know, like, why not just build this into TypeScript? And the answer right now is mostly performance. This is reading more files than TypeScript needs to read. I mentioned before that it needs to do analysis on JavaScript files even when DTS files exist. The whole point of DTS files is so that TypeScript doesn't have to read and analyze JS files. So you'd be like doubling the file reads and parsing and binding and like other kinds of analysis if you wanted TypeScript to do some of this. But I think it does beg the question of like, is there more that TypeScript can do? This is a really widespread problem. I actually ran the other day, I ran this automatically on like the top 5,000 NPM packages just to see like how prevalent different kinds of problems were. And it's something like a third of typed packages in that kind of top tier of downloads have issues that are detectable with this. So that's a lot. And I think that does leave the door like pretty open for TypeScript to do more, or at least like make it more obvious when something is going wrong. So there's things I'm thinking about there. Like, I think the ideal future would be that like this tool can go away and everything else is just like easier. But in the shorter term, one of the things I'd like to do is make it work on definitely types. So right now, like types packages, it doesn't do anything with them, and packages that like have types on BT, it doesn't try to correlate those things. I think that's probably some fairly low hanging fruit, and I think it would help with our definitely typed review. As packages get harder and harder to like publish for packages that do include types, it gets similarly harder for people on definitely types to make these same kinds of, I mean, people are doing the same work. They're just, split across two separate packages instead of in the same. So having this kind of analysis work on DT, I think would update some of our review process there.
That sounds great. You mentioned running this on 5,000 NPM packages. Are you planning to like publish that, write a blog post? I feel like there could be some really interesting insights that you've gotten from.
He doesn't want to be on anybody's hate list, Ian. He's gonna have to name names.
He doesn't have to name names, but just to think like, these top packages, like even the ones that you would think are doing things right because they're super popular, like here's the problems that they have. It could be a really interesting like teaching and learning experience for others to sort of like show like, hey, you're not alone. Like other people are getting this stuff wrong too. And like, yeah, I don't know. I find that really fascinating. Like it could be interesting.
Yeah, it was one of those cases where I'm like, all right, well, I have all this data, now what? And I debated like, should I like tweet out the top 10 so that people, there are a handful of people who have used this tool to start like PRing popular packages and really improve things. And I think that's like so awesome. So I'm really happy to see that kind of thing. But I'm also a little bit afraid of like encouraging hordes of people to go like, harass the top 10 NPM packages that don't have perfect types. Because like I said, diagnosing is easy and suggesting like a sustainable fix can be really hard. So I decided not to do that until I've taken a closer look at some of them to see like, can I even figure out like what these packages should be doing? So right now it's a bit more of a meta-analysis.
If you're offering, that is, I have some personal projects if you want to.
I think in terms of like, you could use that as a framework also to just say, here's the ranked top 5 problems that packages have. Yeah. And like, here is why that happens and what it means when you see this, and just like use it as a way to explain the problem. Maybe you throw in a few possible solutions, but it sounds like those aren't necessarily cut and dried. But I think just helping people understand what the problems are themselves and like what kinds of issues it can cause, I think that's also super useful.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you that the top one is the one that we were just talking about, where there's like the conditions like types import require, and you've only got like the single DTS file trying to be both at the same time.
That makes perfect sense. That does not surprise me.
It's also the one that I'm like most clueless on how to like sustainably solve. Like sometimes you can just like copy and paste the DTS file with a different file extension, but that goes to the problem we were talking about. Like you need a type checker to see if that's actually safe. So like you can copy and paste it and then maybe like run TSC and see if it doesn't break. That honestly might be like the best solution. If it breaks, like you're screwed. And if it doesn't break, then you can publish it. I don't know.
I mean, could you see a future where something like this is a job that a bundler takes on? So could like ESBuild or Vite or something take the role of doing this check for us? Is that a better place than the TypeScript compiler itself to do this kind of thing?
Ultimately, I think tools that produce JavaScript from TypeScript should probably produce DTS files. How much intelligence they need to be able to do that like bundlers aren't already set up to have, I'm not quite sure. So there may be things where you really need the type checker to assist in that, but if we can provide APIs, then I do like the idea that any tool that's going to produce JS can like make it typed and make it safe and use our APIs as much as they need to in order to make that happen. I do think that's like a good longer term vision. I think that users might be disappointed that it's going to take longer because you need to type check a bunch more stuff.
Gotcha. And I only had one more question. I'm a chatty Cathy today. So there's deno, there's bun. I dream personally of a future where TypeScript is not a compile to JavaScript language, where TypeScript is predominantly TypeScript. And we can execute TypeScript. And some of these problems go away because then we're not bundling and other things. That's maybe like a pipe dream, but I'm just curious if other runtimes come into your mind when you're making a thing like this, or is it something you can factor in some way?
Yeah, I'm not super knowledgeable about this, so take everything here with a grain of salt. I'm like less optimistic, I think, about that future right now, looking at the other runtime space, because other runtimes are still like doing module resolution differently, and like Bun supports CommonJS. They don't recommend it for new projects, but the matrix of like different ways that different kinds of modules can interact with each other is like just getting bigger instead of getting smaller. And so far that makes things more difficult, I think. I do agree that like if you're just purely executing TypeScript, some things can get simpler. But I think it's a good goal for runtimes like deno and bun to be able to execute a lot of JavaScript that already exists. But unfortunately, that means like adopting some of the legacy of like we have ESM and we have CJS, and they need to work together somehow.
Yeah, it does create quite a wall between worlds. Oh well. I'll keep dreaming. No matter what you say, I'm gonna stay optimistic.
I can't wait until you solve it. It sounds great.
I promise you it won't be me. I'll be cheering on whoever does it though. Maybe Ian.
I doubt it. So I know we're starting to run out of time here. Is there anything else that we haven't covered that you want to chat about? Maybe call to action you want people to help out with, or things you'd like them to keep in mind, or anything else that's on your mind?
I don't think so. I hope that people get some good use out of the tool, and contributions are welcome. Like I said, the API is still a little in flux. So if you want to work on something, just ping me on the issue tracker or on Twitter or something. But I am definitely happy to have people interested in this stuff. And I also mentioned that there have been a few people who have really taking it on to start like fixing some of these problems, at least, in packages that they depend on. And that's just super useful, especially if you're willing to, not just try to put up the minimal fix, but like really understand like what's going on, what's the sustainable way for them to fix this problem. I think that is like the only way that we really move forward here.
One little PR can go such a long way, It's like one contribution, and then like tens of thousands of people the next morning are using fixed software. It's pretty cool. Cool. Well, Andrew.
Awesome. So AreTheTypesWrong.github.io is the address for everyone to check out. And thanks so much for coming on and chatting about it with us.
Thanks a lot for inviting me. This was a lot of fun.
It's been awesome. Definitely.